So it turns out Gen Z is way more pro-marriage than millennials and even than Xers.
Wow.
I want to talk about this trend more specifically, but I think we often forget that people don't necessarily know the breakdown of generations. So I want to be a little bit helpful in this area. And we take it for granted here in our team because we actually represent, when Lauren's here, she's out today, 4 generations.
Yep.
Ron, you're a boomer.
I am.
I'm technically an Xer, but barely.
Which makes
You're
you
still
an
an
Xer.
And Lauren is firmly a millennial, and then Daria, you're Gen Z, but barely, I guess, right? Is that how it works?
I mean, I'm still Gen Z, even if I'm on the line.
So now, if you don't remember how this breaks down, baby boomers range between birth years 1946 and 1964.
Yep.
And you're barely an Xer, or a boomer then, I should say.
Yeah, I was born in 61. I'm 63, so the youngest boomers are 59.
So you're a young baby.
Yeah.
Okay, a Gen X, 1965 to 1980. I was born in 79.
Mm-hmm.
Barely there. Millennials, also known as Gen Y, 1981 through 1996 birth years. And then Gen Z are those born 1997 or later, according to at least this breakdown. You see a year fluctuation here and there.
It's not or later because we're currently in Gen
Oh, sorry,
Alpha.
to 2012.
There we go.
To 2012.
They're not still being born.
And you're in 1997.
Correct. So I'm right on the line.
Which is painful because I graduated high school that year.
I can
And
do nothing
likewise,
about that.
you were born in 79 when I graduated from high school.
You never get over that, do you?
It's just a fact.
Yeah, it is a fact. Okay, so Gen Z apparently is really shifting their view of marriage. Now, I remember like probably 10 years ago when I first started here, a lot of talk in like the early 2000s and late, what do they call it? The aughts?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
About hookup culture. Do you remember this?
I was a little young, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was this thing among millennials that people, it's just like hookup culture. First date and then, parents, we're going to talk about this in more detail here in a moment, but then you hook up, as they say, on the street.
And even maybe not a date, maybe friends with benefits.
That's what they say, yes, as we're tiptoeing our way towards the issue here. Now, according to a new survey, though, 62% of Gen Z respondents, 62% is a solid majority, not just kinda. It's a solid majority, said that they and their friends don't engage in one-night stands.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Gen Z is becoming a bit more celibate, and we are the generation that is saying, hey, we don't want certain scenes in our movies anymore.
Yeah, and only 23% admitted to casual hookups. So the hookup culture, as much as I remember Christian discussion about it, especially on programs I was a part of, was like, oh no, we're headed to a cliff. Pretty soon, the next generation after millennials, they're just going to have sex every day with everyone. That was kind of the oh no, help!
Yeah, but the way the trends were going, if you extrapolate that continue at that rate, eventually that would be the case.
That is correct, because it was pretty dramatic, because a whopping, compared to in 2004, 78% of young millennials said they had sex on a first date. 78%.
Oof.
No wonder we were freaked out.
Right.
I mean, that's wild.
I will say, before you get too excited, Gen Z kind of has the opposite problem. I mean, obviously, fewer people having sex on a first date is great. Yeah. But the problem is Gen Z is also not dating. So I think you're kind of comparing apples and oranges because they're just very different generations. Gen Z is lonely and not really going out at all.
So perhaps the numbers are inflated just because there's not even an opportunity.
Correct.
But I mean, I'm feeling better about my freakout self years ago when 78% of millennials had sex on the first date.
That's wild.
No wonder they call it hookup culture. I mean, you would have been weird if you didn't. Mm-hmm. Now, according to Relevant Magazine, they say it's not just about fewer hookups. Gen Z is also thinking more seriously about commitment. Only 21% believe marriage is irrelevant. A major shift from 20 years ago, where millennials, 39% thought marriage was irrelevant.
That actually really surprises me, because I thought, at least the older Gen Z, in my experience, they still tend to be part of the marriage is a social construct. It's just a piece of paper. A lot of us were quite traumatized by our parents. Messy divorces. My parents are still together, but I know several people that don't want anything to do with dating or marriage because their parents' divorces were so messy.
Yeah, it's pretty stark to realize, many of my children's peers, their parents are either remarried or divorced and single.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we are the weird ones. And that's sad, I think, in a culture. But
It is.
But when you see millennials, keep in mind, a lot of the parents, I'm an old guy for a dad now with my younger boys. I used to be the hip young parent with my daughter Grace, who's now in the military.
Right.
Now I'm like the old guy. A lot of the parents are millennials.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them are. And no surprise if 78% were into hookup culture. I hate that phrase, but what else do you call it? I don't know what else to call that.
Yeah. The other names that come to mind are less proper to say in culture.
That's the most family-friendly term we've got.
Yeah.
So now, guys like Ron and I would be super optimistic about this. We'd be like, wow, there's less one-night stands. People are taking marriage more seriously. But you're a bit cynical on this, Daria.
I'm just cautious. I mean,
okay, fair.
I think
Yeah.
we've traded one bad thing in for another bad thing, whereas we're just completely antisocial. But the fact they want marriage is great. It's very encouraging. But I don't think Gen Z knows how to date. I don't think they know how to meet people.
Yeah, I'd like your reaction to this. Here's what Relevant Magazine wrote as an explanation. The pandemic played a huge role in reshaping how Gen Z thinks about relationships. Forced isolation put dating on hold at a formative time, leaving many to think more intentionally about what they actually want. Growing up in a world of rising divorce rates also made them more cautious about commitment, not to avoid it, but to get it right. Unlike previous generations who often felt societal pressure to marry, Gen Z seems to view it as a personal, meaningful choice.
And that's great.
Do you agree with that sentiment?
It depends on who you talk to. I do know some people that really desire marriage that are not currently married. I do think there are some Gen Z that feel that way, but I also think there's still a lot of them that are kind of put off by it. And more than that, you've got people that they don't know how to meet people even if they want to. I've got several people that immediately spring to mind that desperately want to get married, but they're just having trouble even getting a date.
Yeah, one person was quoted in the Times. They said that it's hard to be interested in casual dating because the apps are so awful.
Mm-hmm.
Dating apps, she said, if I was in a relationship right now, I'd want to stay in it longer because the grass definitely isn't always greener when it comes to dating nowadays.
Okay.
That's kind of a sad reason.
Yeah.
It used to be there's more fish in the sea.
Yeah.
Come on, Ron, get rid of that girl. There's more fish in the sea. It's a big sea.
Don't cry if she breaks up with you. It's her loss.
And now it's someone's like, boy, his relationship's not great, but it's better than a dating app.
Yeah.
And that's the problem is that's where most people are meeting prospective dates is online on these apps that are not meant to actually help you find someone that you have a genuine connection with.
But there's another kind of, I think, maybe hint that we're in the face of a pretty big cultural shift. Tell me what you think of this. On the issue of internet pornography, a phenomenon that has certainly increased over the years between two surveys, less than half, so less than 40%, said, in this case, half is 50, obviously, but in the study, it was less than 40% of Gen Z said they thought their friends commonly looked at pornography.
That's good.
What they're saying is even internet pornography consumption is dramatically down. 20 years ago, it was almost 60%.
No, so it's less than 40% think their friends are looking at porn or less than 40% are looking at porn because that's a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
Said they thought their friends commonly looked at it.
See, that's a big difference, though, because
it is a big difference.
Maybe Gen Z is still looking at porn. They're just being more secretive about it.
Or perhaps, I mean, is it possible that they're much more aware of the negative consequences, and so they're much less likely to participate?
Let's hope, because it has been getting some, the last couple years, even among secular sources, are like, hey, this is actually quite bad for your brain. And I do think it's Gen Z that's been leading that charge. So maybe this is good, but I just don't know that the numbers explicitly spell that out.
And there's been a number of TV characters who either outright or insinuate that they're watching internet porn. And, it's meant to be like, ha, 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 real funny. But, it comes out and it becomes part of the culture, whether you like it or not. The TV character traits infiltrate culture.
Yeah, I've seen multiple TV shows where like the girlfriend of a character just like accepts that the guy watches porn and she's completely unbothered by it. Or like, yeah, that's just normal. That's what guys do. And it's actually this should. Yes, I've seen it in multiple TV shows.
Ew. Yeah, and as a wider lens on this, I had a really nerdy talk with a friend of mine the other day. I mean, I'm embarrassed to even bring this up.
Wow.
But as we look at society, seems to usually be in some sort of downward spiral is how it feels today, especially now. I mean, we got some emails recently from people who are just like, I can't believe people behave this way. What's happening in our world today? But if you look at history in a wider lens, we're about due for a dramatic shift. Like every 200 to 300 years, society does something like if you look at historical eras, how history classes are taught, right? You have ancient Rome followed by the Middle Ages, followed by the Renaissance, followed by the Enlightenment. And these signify dramatic shifts so much that they get a label, that society does a huge flip and it's totally new. But we seem to forget in modern society that actually at some point we're not just going to keep declining back into caves or something. Like we could just be due for a dramatic cultural change.
I actually have been seeing some studies over the last 5 to 10 years predicting that Gen Z will be the most socially conservative, like morally conservative generation in like 100 plus years or something like that.
Wow.
So that almost supports this theory, right? That if we're running in 200 to 300 year cycles, we could be due for a major shift. And maybe this is hinting at it. Now, okay, that was a super nerdy discussion I had with a friend, right? I mean, wow, what a loser. But what do you make of that, Ron?
It got me, especially Daria's comment. I thought, okay, 100 years ago would have been the roaring 20s. Morality was not in force there. Well, among the rich, but the poor, the farmers and stuff still had their morals.
But there was that cultural decline thing, even in the 20s, right? Flappers. People were like, oh, no, look at these women with their short hair and their dancing. Mm-hmm. What's next?
Right. And then
having sex with everyone on a first date?
Yeah. And then we shifted into stronger moral ethics, at least on a surface level, for the 40s, 50s. Then the 60s was a bit of a revolution and, free love and Woodstock and all of that.
But those are more, right. We tend to view it, though, in smaller chunks, right? In decades, where history, in a wider sense, moves in centuries. Mm-hmm. And so, dare I say, even in 200 or 300 years, which I don't even know what you call that. 200, what is it? Century and then?
Millennia.
That's 1,000,
That's
right?
1,000, so.
But I mean, it's not just even like a shift from, well, we were kind of conservative to now we're just free love. No, this is like, suddenly we're in the dark ages, and then suddenly within a couple of decades, we're not anymore.
Yeah.
I'll say this too. We've talked about this a little bit on the show, but Gen Z is not drinking to the point that I've seen some studies about alcohol companies panicking and having to find new ways to market to my generation because we don't drink for the most part.
And so I'm not, see, that's, again, it's a theory.
Yeah.
But that supports the theory that we could be headed towards some sort of dramatic cultural shift. Does that make you nervous?
No.
Why not? Somebody else is going, ah!
These shifts have happened and will continue to happen. You just ride along with them and you adapt as you need to share the gospel with this new philosophy of culture, whatever it may be.
Yeah, and Jesus rides those waves very easily.
Yep, he can walk on the water.
Like if you think about all the eras of history that have come since his life, death, and resurrection. I mean, could you imagine being one of the last generations that when Rome fell? Oh no, we'll never recover from this. Yes. And then the Enlightenment comes and the Renaissance comes, and so I don't know. It makes me feel a little bit better, I guess.
I just think it is kind of funny because my generation was the one everyone was panicking about. But now more and more studies are coming out like, actually, this generation might be more open to the gospel. This generation might be more moral than our predecessors.
Yeah, it's like poor millennials were like the bottom of the barrel. Sorry, you guys. And Lauren's not here to refute that. But I think that was our fear, right? When we're obsessing over hookup culture before. Our scare was you guys will just
Be even
jump
worse.
jump on the bandwagon and make it even worse. But it seems to be not the case at all.
It's possible.
Look at that. Hope for the future.
Yep. Like a yo-yo, it bottomed out with the millennials and it's coming back up.
We do hope that you all can get dates. But, I mean, if that keeps us from hookup culture, then maybe not.